From the endless winds of the steppe, a storm was born. A storm that would sweep across deserts, forests, mountains, and empires. A storm that history would call Genghis Khan. The Mongolian steppe stretches endlessly, a sea of grass under a sky so wide it seems to swallow the earth. For centuries, it was a land of horsemen and herders, where survival depended not on castles or stone walls, but on speed, loyalty, and the bond between man and horse. And in this land of shifting loyalties, raiding clans, and brutal winters, a boy named Temüjin was born in 1162, destined to become the most feared conqueror the world had ever known. Temüjin's childhood was carved from suffering. His father, Yasuge, a tribal chieftain, was poisoned by rivals when Temüjin was still a boy. With his death, the family lost its protection, and Temüjin, his mother Helen, and his siblings were cast out into the wilderness. They lived like hunted prey, abandoned by their tribe, scavenging for roots and berries, fishing with makeshift tools, enduring the freezing winters with no protection but animal hides. It was hunger, betrayal, and exile that tempered Temüjin's will. There was a legend told by Mongolian storytellers. One day, starving and desperate, Temüjin killed his older half-brother Bektar in a quarrel over food. It was a crime, but also a lesson. Survival meant making brutal choices. Even as a boy, he understood that power belonged to those willing to take it. As he grew, Temüjin saw what divided the Mongol tribes. Constant feuds, ambushes, and betrayals weakened them. Every Khan dreamed of power, but none could unite them all. Temüjin would be different. He believed loyalty should not come from noble birth alone, but from trust, merit, and fear. He gathered warriors who had once been rivals, offering them a simple creed. Follow me, and you will have plunder, honor, and survival. Betray me, and death will be swift. Temüjin reorganized his men into groups of tens, hundreds, and thousands, a disciplined system that broke old clan loyalties. A soldier no longer fought for just his family, but for the Khan. And unlike other steppe leaders, Temüjin rewarded loyalty above blood. Even a poor herder could rise to command thousands if he proved his worth. This was revolutionary. The fractured steppe clans began to see in him not just a chieftain, but a force that could bind them together. The Mongol warrior was like no other soldier the world had seen. Every man was raised on horseback. By the time a Mongol child could walk, he could ride. Their lives were spent in the saddle, drinking mare's milk, hunting with bows, racing across the plains. The weapon of choice was the composite bow, short, powerful, made of wood, horn, and sinew. It could pierce armor at 200 yards. A Mongol horseman could loose arrows with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed, even turning backward in the saddle to fire at pursuers. Their horses were small but fierce, able to endure long marches, eating little but grass. Each warrior had several mounts, allowing them to switch mid-journey and ride for days without rest. Temüjin forged this natural skill into a war machine. His army could cover vast distances in weeks, striking where enemies least expected. He trained them in feigned retreats, pretending to flee, only to turn and annihilate their pursuers. They fought with discipline, like a storm given shape. And behind it all was Temüjin's iron will. The rise of Genghis Khan was written in raids and revenge. His first tests came against the Merkit tribe, who had once kidnapped his young wife Borte. Temüjin, still young and unproven, gathered allies including the powerful Togrul of the Karite and Jamuka, a sworn blood brother. Together, they struck the Merkits with fire and fury, rescuing Borte and crushing their enemies. But alliances on the steppe were fragile. Temüjin and Jamuka soon turned on one another. At the Battle of Dalon Baljut in 1187, Jamuka's forces, 30,000 strong, overwhelmed Temüjin's 20,000. Captured men were boiled alive, a grim reminder that mercy was rare on the steppe. Yet, Temüjin did not fall. He rebuilt, recruited more men, and promised them not just survival, but greatness. Slowly, clan by clan, he turned defeat into opportunity. His vision of unity began to overshadow the old ways of blood feuds. By 1201, Temüjin had grown too powerful to ignore. A great council of tribes, a Kurultai, was called, and rivals proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. It was more than a title. It was the birth of a storm. The man who had once been abandoned in the wilderness was now master of the Mongol steppe. His horsemen stood ready, hardened by years of hunger and war, their loyalty bound not by family, but by fear and reward. At night, they lit no fires, riding silently under the stars. By day, they swept across the plains like shadows with arrows. Cities would tremble at their approach, kingdoms would fall to their fury. The world beyond the steppe had not yet realized what was coming, but soon the name of Genghis Khan would be whispered in palaces and marketplaces from China to Europe. For now, the tribes of Mongolia had been forged into a single blade, and that blade was ready to strike. The world beyond the steppes thought the Mongols were shadows, wild riders who would vanish into the horizon. But shadows grew longer, and soon they swallowed entire kingdoms. At the dawn of the 13th century, Asia was a world divided. To the east stood the Shah dynasty and the mighty Jin dynasty of northern China, their cities fortified with towering walls. To the west lay the rich Muslim kingdoms of Central Asia, like Khwarezm, trading silk, spices, and gold. Farther still, in the Middle East and Europe, kings and popes plotted wars of their own. None of them expected a wave of horsemen to sweep out of the Mongolian steppe, an army led by a man whose vision was not to plunder and retreat, but to rule and reshape the world. That man was Genghis Khan. The Mongols' first target was the Western Shah dynasty, a kingdom in northwestern China. In 1209, Genghis led his riders across deserts and mountains, testing his new empire against a settled dynasty. The Shah underestimated him. They thought these nomads were just raiders, but Genghis brought siege engineers captured from earlier battles who built catapults and trebuchets to smash city walls. His cavalry cut off supplies, circling like hawks. The Shah surrendered, forced to send tribute, silk, grain, and princesses. But this was only the beginning. In 1211, Genghis turned to the mighty Jin dynasty, whose emperor mocked him as an uncivilized barbarian. Genghis responded with steel. With an army of over 100,000 horsemen, he swept into Jin territory. The Mongols used terror as a weapon. They destroyed entire garrisons, leaving only a few survivors to spread stories of horror. Cities burned, defenders slaughtered, women and children enslaved. Panic spread faster than his armies. At the Battle of Yeheling, 1211, The Mongols lured the Jin into a narrow pass, then crushed them with a storm of arrows and cavalry charges. The Jin dynasty never fully recovered. The message was clear. Even the greatest walls could not stop the storm. What made the Mongols so unstoppable? Mobility. Their cavalry could ride 100 miles a day, switching horses to keep moving without rest. Discipline. Soldiers were punished harshly for disobedience, but rewarded richly for loyalty. Intelligence networks. Genghis built one of the first organized spy systems, gathering maps, trade routes, and weaknesses of enemies long before he struck. Psychological warfare. He used fear as a weapon, spreading stories of massacres to make cities surrender without a fight. They were not just warriors, they were a machine. If there was one moment when the Mongol Empire became a true world power, it was the war with Khwarezmia, modern Iran, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. In 1218, Genghis sent a caravan of merchants to trade silk and horses with Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, ruler of Khwarezm. But the Shah betrayed him. The merchants were executed, and the ambassadors sent by Genghis were humiliated and killed. This was a mistake the world would never forget. Genghis Khan unleashed his fury. In 1219, with over 200,000 warriors, he crossed the desert and descended upon Khwarezm. His armies moved in multiple waves, striking cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Ugarit. At Bukhara, he entered the Great Mosque, climbed the pulpit, and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The city was burned. Samarkand fell after a brutal siege, its defenders overwhelmed. Ugarit resisted, but after weeks of bloodshed, the Mongols slaughtered hundreds of thousands. The Shah fled into the mountains, hunted like a wolf until he died in despair. His empire was erased from the map. The Mongols had proven that no betrayal would go unpunished, and no empire was safe. With Central Asia in ruins, the Mongols rolled farther west. Scouts reached into the Caucasus, crushing Georgian armies, and even into Eastern Europe, where they tested the strength of Poland and Hungary. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, Mongol generals tricked a coalition of Russian princes into pursuit. Pretending to retreat, they lured the Rus into open steppe, then turned and destroyed them. Thousands of Russian prisoners were suffocated under wooden planks, a brutal warning to Europe. For the first time, Europe realized the storm from the east was not a myth. Through all this blood and fire, Genghis Khan was not just a warlord, he was a lawgiver. He introduced the yasa, a code of laws that bound his empire. Theft, betrayal, and disobedience were punished by death. Religious freedom was allowed, and merchants were protected under Mongol law. He built roads and a postal system to unite his lands. His goal was not only conquest, but order. He believed he was chosen by eternal heaven to rule the world. And by the 1220s, his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. But even storms fade. In 1227, during the campaign against the Western Shah, who had rebelled against him, Genghis Khan fell ill. Some say he was thrown from his horse. Others whisper he was wounded in battle. He died in secrecy, his burial place still unknown. But his death did not end the storm. His sons and grandsons carried it forward. Under them, the Mongols would conquer Baghdad, Poland, Hungary, and most of China, building the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. But it was Genghis who lit the fire. From the deserts of Persia to the walls of China, from the foremost of Russia to the mountains of the Caucasus, the name of Genghis Khan spread like thunder. He had begun as Temüjin, an orphan left to die on the steppe. He ended as Genghis Khan, master of half the known world. The storm had swept across continents, and history would never be the same. From fire, fear, and fury, an empire was born.